Welcome to the Proceedings podcast. I'm Bill Hamblet, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings at the U.S. Naval Institute. Today is Wednesday, April 16th, 2025. Good to have you on board, everyone. This episode is brought to you by Booz Allen. Booz Allen delivers outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities. Work with solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters collaborate faster with allies and partners from the open seas to the edge of space. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. All right, joining me today, my guest is Marine Corps Major Mike Holdridge. He's the author of an article in the April issue of Proceedings titled Home Station C2 Will Help Win Future Wars. Major, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Before we dive into your article, just tell our listeners a little bit about your background.
So for my background, my commissioning source, I commissioned in 2011 as a graduate of the platoon leaders course for the Marine Corps. No prior enlisted service, anything along those lines. I received the MOS of 0602 communications officer in 2012, and I hit the fleet in 2013. And my current job is at the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab, where I'm a concept development team leader, primarily focusing on infantry battalion modernization.
Cool. All right. A lot of good stuff coming out of the Warfighting Lab. And in fact, quite a few of your colleagues down there have written for Proceedings in the last couple of years. Yeah. So now let's talk about Home Station C2, or Command and Control. So your article states at the start, if the Marine Corps conducts C2 for the next generation of warfare, the same way it conducted C2 in Iraq and Afghanistan, the service will fail in its mission. Pretty strong words. To be effective in future conflict, the service must experiment with, train toward, and be ready to command and control forces from home station. So just to start off, what's Home Station C2? What does that mean?
So to really understand that one, I have to talk about really what the opposite of that is. So I'm going to start with the opposite, then I'll go into much more detail about Home Station C2. Really, this is a focus on, there's a heavy emphasis on kind of this Alpha Bravo command and control node, which is at echelon, really focused primarily on the infantry battalion, the infantry regiment, and the analogous organizations throughout the MAGTF of having replicated capabilities, mirrored capabilities at each one of those nodes that are able to both exist within the the adversary's weapon engagement zone, and are able to transition control of the battle in between those two nodes without any degradation of capability, degradation of service. It relies on a lot of different things in order to actually be able to effectively do that one. That, in my opinion, is not really achievable, primarily because we have to recognize that within modern warfare against a peer adversary, there is a trade-off that exists between capability and targetability. So basically, in order to remain less likely to be targeted, you have to start to control your signature. And it's not just your electromagnetic signature, your physical signature is one of the biggest indicators of those nodes. So you have to start thinking about how many people can I actually have at this node is one of the first questions. And as soon as you start to slim down those nodes into really small numbers of people, then you have to have a conversation about prioritization of the different warfighting functions. So for example, how many Intel Marines can you have at one of those very small signature nodes in order to actually be able to do Intel processing? And that exists across all of the warfighting functions. Home Station C2 is really the other view on how to do this one that just more closely aligns with this forward main concept. And we recognize when we talk about a forward main that the forward has less capability, but they are focused and prioritized capabilities for what the commander needs, whereas the main has all of the capabilities. Home Station C2 is just looking at extending where that main is located closer and closer to the continental US, where the likelihood of being targeted is significantly lower. The range rings for enemy assets are very different, and the likelihood that they're going to reach out and attack a battalion or regimental or division main that is sitting in CONUS is very different than a battalion, regimental, division main that is sitting in country and is within a range ring of a lower echelon weapon system, that kind of concept.
Got it. So let me just put that into non-Marine speak, maybe for our audience that aren't Marines that are trying to understand this a little bit. So currently, the thought process, if I got this right, Alpha Bravo, so 2 communications nodes or headquarters nodes forward, both would be, let's say we're talking about a China scenario here, both would be within the first island chain, right? And so one could pick up if the other one, is degraded or destroyed or attacked, right? But you've got still both Alpha and Bravo nodes are inside the weapons engagement zone of the Chinese military, right? That anti-access area denial zone. And what your article, this home station C2 concept is, you'd have a forward command and control node, probably smaller, very focused, that would be inside that first island chain, but the main command and control node would be back maybe at Camp Pendleton. Did I get that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right. So, so you're larger. So you said you mentioned battalion, you mentioned regiment level or division size. What are we talking about for a command and control node for both of those, or for all 3 of those sort of scenarios, in terms of the numbers of people? And the footprint that you would have both forward and at home station?
So I've seen a variety of different constructs that they're trying to get this down. And again, one of the biggest indicators of what those nodes are is the physical size to it. As you can imagine, a division C2 node is significantly larger than a battalion C2 node, just because there's a lot more things they're trying to do, and there's a much larger staff, a lot more support requirements that are going to have to go into this. But at the battalion level, we've seen around 20 people, maybe 30 people within each one of those nodes, which is still really large and is still something that is going to cue interest from adversary forces. It's certainly enough that would cue interest from our forces as we're looking at stuff. The question is, when you're talking about, say, 25 people, how many of those different warfighting functions can you really prioritize to maintain continuity of operations over an extended period of time? The human factors that are involved with having a node up for a week and the displacements that have to go into this, the continual security, all of those other things that are going to very rapidly erode the human factors for that node, challenges having only 1 or 2 intel personnel. And I'm just using intel as an example to this, but it exists within fires, within logistics, within any of those different warfighting functions. Really, you end up having to have at least 2 to 3 people per warfighting function, but that very quickly fills up your 20 some odd person C2 node. And really, you end up getting into this conversation about having to prioritize. And we see units doing that already, because there's not usually much of an admin focus at these. So I'm talking about the actual administrative Marines that are doing things that are important during modern battlefield, because they're doing the casualty tracking, they're doing the purse stats, the personnel reports, all of those other things that track where everybody is on the battle space. It's still an incredibly important thing, but it's not as directly related to combat power. So those are getting deprioritized within these nodes. But then where do they sit? If you have both Alpha and Bravo, and I have seen units kind of create a third, like a rear area node, to fill in some of these deprioritized warfighting functions that, in my opinion, we can actually resolve this by, instead of having an Alpha Bravo, have them forward main. That main exists in that rear area where all of those other ancillary tasks that are important but are deprioritized can fit in. And you can do a lot more, because again, the other concept is with the Alpha Bravo, obviously if they get targeted, things along those lines, destroy, the other one's able to pick up, but you're also able to do this in advance of getting targeted. So displacements, if Alpha needs to tear down, Bravo can take the fight. Well, if the main is always online and always ready to do that and always has perfect cognizance of what's going on in the battle space, or at least as perfect as we can get within within the friction of war and an inherently dynamic environment, then the alpha can tear down and move at any point in time, or the forward, I should say, can tear down and move at any point in time because you always have the main online.
Gotcha, gotcha. And that's different from the way Marines operated in Iraq and Afghanistan. In those two conflicts, there were Alpha Bravo. They're both forward. They're both, you know, close to the main fight, right?
Yes, and even when we had a forward and main construct in Iraq and Afghanistan, that main would typically be in country. It would
Yeah,
be relatively close to it. Now, there's a lot of differences as to why within that semi-permissive counterinsurgency environment that compared to large-scale combat operations against a peer adversary, we recognize those are inherently different. But we also saw in Iraq and Afghanistan that we had a large number of very high echelon C2 nodes in country with a lot of people that never left the wire, never actually left that fob area,
right.
which is there's an article that I pulled in for this one written by a Army brigade commander, I believe it was Colonel White, and I'm paraphrasing what he said in here, but it was one of those questions of if if somebody never left the wire, do they have to be there to do their job? Because inherently they didn't go out on a convoy. They didn't go out on a patrol. They didn't go out for key leader engagements. They just happened to be doing their job from Iraq or Afghanistan. And things were a little bit different with technology at that point in time. Things were nowhere near as reliable in 2003, 2005, 2008 as they are today. So it was one of those questions that somebody had asked me when I was first drafting this article, and I was sharing the ideas and make sure that I gave myself a sanity check. They were asking of whether or not those nodes in Iraq and Afghanistan would have been as effective if they had been ran from, say, Pendleton or Lejeune. And my response was, well, technology has changed. At that point in time, absolutely not. But with how we have proliferated technology in the last 20 years, yes, because I can, as an example, if I can watch a Group 1 UAS flown on the other side of the world with perfect video quality, no latency, and that is a very, very strenuous information exchange requirement to be able to watch that full motion video, then why can't I do anything else for it? And I can tell you, I can. That's one of the things I test at McWill is I can actually watch any of this Group 1, Group 2 UASs anywhere in the world from my office in Quantico. So if I can do this from Quantico, why can't a division or a regiment or a battalion main do it from Camp Pendleton, Camp Lejeune, anything along those lines?
Yeah, so the technology is changing not just for blue forces in terms of the communications technology, and as I think you put in your article something about unless you're talking on line of sight within 5 miles, whether you're 5 miles or 5,000 miles away, it's almost immaterial. But the adversary technology, the threat, if you will, is changing radically as well. Talk a little bit more about those aspects. I'm curious about the sort of GPS denial, electronic warfare, those sorts of things. Is there a risk in being, having your main headquarters back home in that forward GPS and electronic, heavy electronic warfare environment that you're going to face, against a peer adversary?
So there is absolutely risk. I'm just going to go off and say it on the bat. And one of the problems, in my opinion, is that we do not do a very good job of understanding risk within the information environment, within the electromagnetic environment. We kind of view it in like a binary of there's risk or there's not risk, which we don't do in any other form of warfare.
Yeah.
We understand the risk, we measure the risk, we find ways to mitigate the risk, and at times the commander accepts risk when required in order to meet the mission and recognize that there's a difference between risk to the individual and risk to the mission. And we don't do a very good job of understanding that. We do recognize that GPS jamming, GPS denial, spoofing, jamming, anything along those lines does exist, but very rarely do we actually start to assess the what that risk really means for maneuver. We have the same thing within EW. Now, granted, a lot of this is my job as a commo is to find a way to communicate at any time. And because of that, we've built in very resilient and reliable PACE plans. So PACE is primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency communications methods. We've built resiliency into our architectures in a lot of different ways, far more than we ever had in the past. So the risk of electronic warfare and GPS jamming 100% exists, but what's the level that it exists at? And what is the mitigation that we can come into in order to ensure that we still have the ability to communicate? And really, it also gets into understanding that within enemy technology, we have to accept that they have, because electronic warfare is not just jamming. Electronic warfare is also the sensing aspects. It's the direction finding. It's finding my nodes based off the electromagnetic signature. The Our adversaries have very good ISR, so intel, surveillance, and reconnaissance drones. They're able to use a variety of different methods to collect and find our locations, and it really has become a transparent battle space. Nobody can remain hidden in today's battle space off of a variety of different things. But again, this goes back into the risk conversation about, yes, there's a risk of being found, but it's understanding that level of risk. And really, the most effective mitigation thing. This was another article that I pulled from the commanding general of the Army's National Training Center that we saw during some of our IBX experimentation, and it was fantastic because the article referenced the idea that in a transparent battle space, nobody can remain hidden, but anybody can look unimportant. Well, we have to start realizing what is going to cue the understanding of what something is. And again, this gets back into the conversation about the physical and technical signature of those things that are existing at those nodes. With people being one of the primary things they're going to give away a node. And it's not just people, because it's large satellite dishes, it's counter battery radar systems, it's tubed artillery is a fantastic example of identifying that something's probably an artillery firing position if there's tubed artillery. Within our C2 nodes, we can recognize that that we're probably not going to have tubed artillery right next to a C2 node. That's probably not a great idea, so we probably won't do that. But if we have 50, 75, 100 people, well, that's much more indicative of, especially if there's nothing else around there, that's most likely going to be a C2 node. So it's recognizing the different capabilities the enemy has, understanding the risks that can come out of this, but also having a much more in-depth conversation about what that risk is, rather than saying there's risk or not risk. It's understanding the levels of risk. Now, when we talk about the differences of home station C2 and how do we mitigate some of those risks, well, that's why at no point in time am I ever going to advocate that the forward should not be in theater. If we do have some of those impacts to it, well, you do have the forward that is in theater that can do limited command and control for a short period of time, because on none of those electronic warfare or jamming things are they a permanent off. They are a short-term temporary off that you usually want to cue into other kinetic effects that the adversary may be wanting to do. But you do have that mitigation from having that node in there. But it's also recognizing, again, when it's a discussion about what does the risk actually mean, if we're using beyond line of sight means anyway, anything that's going to jam somebody that's in the US is going to impact somebody who's 50 miles away, 100 miles away, at times even 5 miles away, if their primary means of communication are not line of sight. They're beyond line of sight.
Gotcha. Your article also ties in very nicely with some ongoing discussions about contested logistics. So large C2 nodes inside the adversary weapons engagement zone, those are hard to sustain, right?
Yes. So an example to this one is I was looking at a regimental main during one of the exercises last year that was about 150 to 175 people. But we have to recognize 150, 175 people. That's a lot of class 1 food and water, class 3 fuel, and probably class 5 for their security posture as well. That importantly is not going to somebody else. It is not going to the guys that have to be there in order to do their job. The service rifle for our infantry units, the M27, only shoots so far, so they have to be at a certain spot in order to be able to do their job. But if we can prioritize the logistics, and it's not just the logistics, it's the maneuver between islands. If we're looking at the Indo-PACOM area, and again, this applies everywhere in the world, not just the Indo-PACOM area, but we recognize that contested logistics is really, really hard there. If we're talking about the difficulty of moving a rifle company or an artillery unit or a sensing unit from one island to another, and we want to take away that littoral mobility to give that to a C2 node that can do that job just as well from Hawaii, Camp Pendleton, Camp Lejeune, name your other country that we might want to put those nodes at. But we've now expended that limited littoral mobility on that asset instead of the guys that actually have to be there to do their job.
Yeah, got it. So as I was reading your article, I was reminded of the adage, culture eats strategy for breakfast. How likely is it that a Marine colonel or a general will be willing to commit forces while sitting back in safety at Camp Pendleton, for example? In other words,
So,
is moving to home station C2, is this going to be a major cultural shift and one that, might not happen because of that culture, right?
so yes. So there's one. There's the cultural aspect of we want this idea of shared misery, and it's not so much that like we want that we're trying to find ways to be miserable, but it's recognizing our junior Marines are going through absolute terrible situations. They're living like animals. They're doing all this stuff because they're out there doing the hard work in the Wes. But I'm back here in Pendleton, and I have a shower, and I have a cup of coffee, and I stopped at McDonald's for breakfast on my way in, which is not what our Marines are getting to do out there. There's absolutely that problem. However, I would contend that the higher echelon headquarters never actually experienced the level of shared misery that the guys at the front line ever did. The other part to it is we should not let this feeling that we should not let the personal emotional feeling compromise our strategy, because the impacts to having a division C2 node that gets destroyed and kills the entire division staff and kills that division CG, the impacts of that are enormous.
Yeah.
And really, we recognize that is one of our critical requirements, is the ability to rapidly synchronize across all the warfighting functions and to enable all of these different pieces to work together. While we do have decentralized C2, there are still aspects of our C2 architecture that require all of these different things to function together. Our fires process would massively slow down if the FSCC no longer existed. The commander's decisions are going to have a problem set if the commander is no longer alive. In order to make those decisions, then we have to start working through the succession of command. While we have a process for that does slow down our tempo.
Yeah. Therefore, it's really it's a critical capability, which makes it a critical vulnerability, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
The other part to it is there's a quote that I keep hearing around at McWill when we talk through these things of tradition is peer pressure from dead people, which is another one of those culture eat strategy for breakfast. Great adage, and it really forces
I got to
us
write that one down.
it really forces us to have a hard look at tradition is great and tradition is amazing. Tradition gives us that esprit de corps and on all of those other things that give us the motivation to be better every day. However, we do have to balance that about is this logical for us to do?
Yeah.
There is so much induced risk off of this that we have to have that honest conversation. Now, the other problem with this is recognizing as well that all of these senior officers, senior commanders, senior enlisted are basing things off of their experience. So when I first checked in, my immediate boss that I had at McWill, a fantastic officer, Lieutenant Colonel Gerald, no, I absolutely love the guy, but he told me a joke my first day. He said, "Why do commanders carry pistols? To shoot the commo." And it's because we just recognize that comms have not always been great. Comms was always a challenge. He would always tell me as well that comms is a matter of will, to find a way to be able to communicate. Things 10, 15 years ago were nowhere near as reliable or resilient as they are today. As an example, in I'm blanking on my years right now, but I believe it was in 2022. I deployed out with Task Force 61-2 with 2nd Marine Division, and when we finished the deployment, we're doing our going away and doing all that stuff, and they had a chance to talk about every staff officer that we had on there, and the division CG. When it comes time for me, he lamented the fact that he never got to yell at me about comms ever being down, because comms worked the entire time that we were out there for the deployment. We had one small window that had very little operational impact, and we were able to resolve that problem in an hour once we actually realized there was a problem. So things are so much better today than they've ever been, but it is getting some of these commanders, some of these senior officers, some of these senior enlisted to recognize how things have changed since the early 2000s when comms were not reliable. And there was when I was a battalion commo, we would do debriefs from any of our convoys operations that we went on. And one of the debriefs from it was their no comm plan, their signal plan for when communications wasn't working was really good. And the line that came out of that was no comm plan is good, which then as the battalion commo, that was constantly thrown at me whenever I talked about anything. It was like, oh, well, no comm plan is good. No wonder your stuff doesn't work. I was like, okay, let's have a better conversation about this. But it is, I think it would be really challenging for a lot of our senior officers and senior enlisted to be willing to do this during training, because it is recognizing the cultural and the experience differences that they've had. However, I'm also of the opinion that as soon as rounds start flying, this will be the natural occurrence, because if we don't do this, I think we're going to have a lot of dead colonels and generals, and the living colonels and generals will take the hint and start doing this from a distance, so that they don't have their C2 nodes destroyed, and they don't lose tempo as a result of having those C2 nodes destroyed. All the rest of the staff members that enable us to be able to do all these things across the warfighting functions. I think this is a natural occurrence. I'm just trying to get ahead of the curve, so people start thinking about this before we start having dead Marines.
Yeah, I'm curious what kind of feedback you've been getting on the article, or if it reflects, conversations and potential, things that you're working on at the Warfighting Lab.
So most of the feedback that I have gotten has been positive, of people saying this makes sense. This is the direction we need to start changing things to. And I know that there's negative criticisms. Nobody's reached out to me with those negative criticisms yet, and I'm very curious what those are. So I'm actually kind of looking forward to getting some of those negative criticisms. So if anybody does see this and they think that I'm incredibly wrong or way off base, please let me know, and I'd love to have the conversation, because I want to. I'm frequently, when I go through these things, I hope that I'm wrong. I don't want to be right about this, because I'm going for kind of like a worst case scenario where I think we'll have a lot of dead generals, colonels, and all of the other people that support those generals and colonels. I'm hoping that I'm wrong, but I haven't seen the reason as to why this doesn't make any sense, and more importantly, the reason as to why having those people within the WES is going to be fine. So I'm looking forward to people giving me negative feedback, but everything that I've gotten so far is this makes a lot of sense, and this is the conversation that we need to start getting to.
Yeah, I like it. For anyone out there who has a comment on this article, we always invite comments at Proceedings. You can email a comment up to about 400 words to comment and discussion at USNI. Just send an email with the name of the article, and we'll publish that in our comment and discussion, which is our letters to the editor in Proceedings. And we look forward to that. So we're running short on time. Any last questions I should have asked, or parting shots, or saved rounds for me, Major?
So there's one other piece that I want to throw in here for it is we used to have a conversation a couple years ago about trying to build more and more multidisciplinary Marines that can do many things. This was kind of the idea of getting towards like a soft mindset and all this other kind of stuff. And part of the conversation was earn your seat on the MV-22 by being able to do more than one job. And in my mind, we need to start changing the conversation. Instead of earn your seat by saying you can do more than one job, earn your seat by saying why you have to be there to do your job. I have, at previous times in my career, there's one specific one where we had established Special Force MAGTF CENTCOM. So we had I was with a logistics battalion at the time. We had a small det go out there to support the 06 level headquarters that went out for Special Force MAGTF CENTCOM. And it was a very small det for the battalion. I was not on that det. I was able to do all of my comm planning from Camp Pendleton for the guys that were out there in Kuwait and all the other stuff they did in Special Force MAGTF. So if I can do my job from a distance and do all of my comm planning, we need to start thinking about ways that we can do that for other stuff as well. So it really goes back to, in my mind, earn your seat by saying why you have to be there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Good way to end it up. So my guest today has been Marine Corps Major Mike Holdridge. He's the author of an article titled Home Station C2 Will Help Win Future Wars. It's in the April issue of Proceedings. Mike, thanks for writing for Proceedings and for being on the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm glad that you guys published the article because I gives me an idea that I'm in the right direction for stuff. So I appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate the opportunity to be here on podcast.
Yeah, and this wasn't your first Proceedings article. I'm sure it won't be your last. So we look forward to your next thing that you write for us. Save the date. The Naval Institute's 152nd annual meeting will be held on 14 May in the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center in Annapolis. We're going to have a panel discussion on shipbuilding. It's always a great event to come to our annual meeting. Put it on your calendar now. 14 May, kicking off at about 1600 in the afternoon. More details to follow. This episode was brought to you by Booz Allen, delivering outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities. Work with solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters collaborate faster with allies and partners from the open seas to the edge of space. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. And until next episode, remember, victory begins at the Naval Institute.